Good afternoon, my name is Alec Bansel, and today I'll be presenting my research on Mr. Morale, the Big Steppers, in relation to African American lived experiences. So at its purest form, hip-hop music is a genre of popular music developed in the United States by African Americans, Caribbean Americans, and Latino Americans in the Bronx borough of New York City in the 1970s. More specifically, on account of William Sitso's peer-reviewed journal, quote, histories of the music identify the incursion of the Bronx Expressway into the South Bronx as a major catalyst of the music. With this being said, it is evident that hip-hop music is an art of liberation and instrumental voice, specifically for African Americans in its original form, to express themselves and the injustices that they face. It is not a taught musical genre, and there is no traditional musicality to it. Rather, it's a voice and sound laid in front of you. Therefore, it is vital to look at this art form at face value to uncover the full truth and meaning behind this primary source of Black history. So I specifically chose to study Kendrick Lamar, his experience, and his music for a couple of distinct reasons. First, Lamar is an African-American hip-hop artist from Compton, California, who is known for his truthful and vivid storytelling. For example, his 2012 album, Good Kid, Mad City, follows him and his friends driving his mom's minivan throughout a day in Compton and their daily encounters and realities as young Black men in America. Additionally, his 2014 album, To Pimp a Butterfly, in short, details as an African-American man his emancipation from America's modern institutionalized society. His extraordinary skills as an artist has won him industry recognition and accolades, including but not limited to 16 Grammy Award wins and a 2018 Pulitzer Prize. Above all, I chose Kendrick because of his socially conscious voice that well represents his experience as an African American male in today's modern society. To start my literature review, I would like to explore Kellen Northcutt's peer-reviewed journal titled Jay-Z and OJ, Sport and the Performance of Race in Hip-Hop Music. In this study, he investigates the relationship between hip-hop messaging and lived experiences and realities of African Americans. He's able to do so by performing a content analysis on Jay-Z's song, The Story of OJ, and analyzing the data to interpret the impact of Black Americans' lived experiences on their identity and their ability to progress economically and socially, regardless of their social standing. So in all, he identified three major themes in his data, the first being a battle with Blackness, second, economic enslavement and financial freedom, and thirdly, systematic subjugation. Moreover, this data exposes a culture of racism in many subcultures of American society. It's clear that these difficulties are brought upon by numerous issues that are endemic within systematic policies and institutions. Additionally, Elizabeth Graham's research, Gangster Rap, the war on drugs and the location of African American identity in Los Angeles from 1988 to 1992, studied how the birth of rap in South Central LA and the war on drugs spatialized identity structure on race relations inside the city. In her case studies, she identified that African Americans reflect their inner city Black experiences in the form of hip hop. As these rappers became commercially successful, they portrayed an urban identification defined by their gangster image to quote unquote keep it real and stamp their authenticity. However, as this gangster rap image established racialization in LA, it began to be used against them to formulate city boundaries. Furthermore, soon this spatialized racial dynamic was abused as LA's municipal interests manipulated this gangster image in their war on drugs campaign to criminalize it and cause tensions between real and imagined gangsters. This has all led me to ask the question, how does Kendrick Lamar's personal growth testified in the album Mr. Morale, The Big Steppers compare to the continuity and change of African American lived experiences? To perform our research, I utilized a mixed methods approach. I conducted a case study of Lamar's personal experiences through the content analysis of his 2022 album. I then evaluated and compared these experiences with the prior experiences on his 2015 album, To Pimp a Butterfly, in which I utilized prior research. And then lastly, I drew implications of his experiences in relation to the broader African American community. For data, like I mentioned earlier, why I chose Kendrick Lamar, I chose this album because it best represents the current climate of African American lived experiences in the United States. For the process of my content analysis, first I decided to use a software program called MaxQDA. It's a software that helps aid content analysis. So in order to do so, I downloaded all the lyrics into folders on different pages. And to start my process, I listened to the song first, and then after listening one time through, I listened and read the lyrics. And then the next few times, I would code the lyrics for words and phrases that might relate to his lived experiences. And then lastly, I paraphrased or summarized certain lyrics for implications that I might have. After my content analysis, I did a comparative analysis of my case study to compare the findings to previous studies on Lamar's 2015 album and look for a change in the culture. So the first theme that I derived from my data was community and upbringing. Fundamentally, it's important to understand that he was raised in Compton, California, which is a crime-ridden and impoverished community. On his song, Count Me Out, Lamar says that he, quote, fought like a pit bull terrier, meaning just like pit bull surroundings impact their behavior, Kendrick's surroundings influenced his worldview and formed his intense behavior as an adolescent. It also creates poor habits and trauma, which will further be established in unraveling. Additionally, in this community, there's a pressure to be a stereotypical man and fit in with his gangster culture. This concept is epitomized on his song Auntie Diaries. As kids at the school would use homophobic slurs as, quote, comedic relief, and, quote, my uncles don't like him, Mary and his aunt, that much, and at parties, why they always want to fight him that much, end quote. The lack of openness to the LGBTQ plus community, like his poor treatment towards Kendrick's transgender aunt, further establishes this notion. Lastly, he was constantly fighting outside threats and the cyclical nature of violence, crime, poverty, and imprisonment. This notion is clearly evident on the song Worldwide Steppers when he says, you're either going to be killed or in jail, killer psychology, silent murder, what's your body count, who's your sponsorship? Then my second theme that I derived was family. It's important to recognize that although he was raised in a household with both of his parents, their interactions weren't always positive and oftentimes created conflict. This is particularly applicable with his father. In his song Father Time, he raps, Mama said, that boy is exhausted. He said, go expletive yourself. If you give up now, that's gonna cost him, end quote. On the basis of his father's own experience, Lamar's father instilled a callous mentality within him, forcing him to be the stereotypical tough man and hustle through life, just like in order to make it just like his father did. Additionally, he was forced to hide his emotions and never express himself. When he says, quote, hid my emotions, never express myself, men should never show their feelings, being sensitive never helped. These childhood experiences left him with unresolved tensions leading into his adulthood. One result was the broken relationships due to the unhealthy coping mechanisms he used to cope with his traumas. Off the opening track on the album, Lamar says, Green Eyes said you'd be okay for first tour, sex the pain away. Lamar's use of sexual pleasure outside his marriage led to toxic relationship dynamics with his fiancee, Whitney Alford, which culminates on the track Re-Cry Together. This song is a heated exchange of hurtful and demeaning language that emphasizes the detrimental effects left behind by the generational curses that continue the cycle. However, this does turn around for the better, which will soon be discussed. And then my third theme was trauma. As a result of all these factors previously described, it's evident that Kendrick dealt with a lot of trauma in his youth and adult life. He discusses generational traumas, or curses as he calls them, of the Black community, one of which being the lack of a father figure in many households, specifically with his childhood friends. And then another significant traumatic experience is sexual abuse. On the song Mr. Morale, he specifically talks about the harms it inflicts on victims, sometimes leading to a victim to victimizer cycle. He reflects, quote, I think about Robert Kelly. If he weren't molested, I wonder if he'd fail him, if life failed him. I wonder if Oprah found closure the way that she postured the hurt that a woman carries, end quote. But in the latter lyrics regarding Oprah Winfrey, Lamar once again refers to the generational curse of trauma and pain that victims carry if they do not receive closure. On the song, Whether I Sober, he also thinks about his lack of action when he witnessed his own mother being abused at the young age of 5. Quote, I heard it all, I should have grabbed a gun, but I was only 5. I still feel it weighing on my heart, my first tough decision. This left him traumatized and filled with guilt that remained inside him through his adulthood. With a lack of resources and extent of knowledge, this led to unhealthy coping mechanisms like disenfranchised grief, materialism, and acts of infidelity. However, this continues to linger within him into his adult years because of the stigmas against therapy and self-care in his childhood and his community. For example, he asked himself on the song Die Hard, can I open up, is it safe or not? I'm afraid a little, you relate or not. In my own comparative analysis, I used the research of James D. McLeod and Adam Wirt on To Pimp a Butterfly. On this previous album, they recognized the highs and lows in Lamar's recited experiences. Some of his struggles include the fact that the threat of death is omnipresent in Lamar's upbringing, the degradation of humanity due to poverty, drug and gang violence, police mistreatment, and racism. And Lamar also faces tension between his love for his community and being surrounded by violence. He begins to form a self-acknowledgement of his own hypocrisy of violence against his own race. This poses a contradiction between his Black pride and gang violence, which creates anxiety and tension within him. Also, he holds guilt for, quote, leaving behind his community and chasing pleasures over God. But on the contrary, there are also moments of pride, strength, and triumph. Nevertheless, the fight between the duality of these experiences is left unresolved on this 2015 album. So this all culminates in the theme that I derived as internal change, as he's able to overcome the past tensions seen on both of these albums. His fiancée Whitney finally convinces him to go to therapy with Eckhart Tolle, who was a spiritual teacher that helped him find inner peace through his world-renowned teachings. The intro to Count Me Out marks section 10 of Breakthrough. This took him through a long, deep introspection. In short, he was ultimately able to confront his pain and sufferings. For instance, he says, I got some regrets, but my past won't keep me from my best. One big triumph for him specifically was absolving his ego, acknowledging that, quote, I'm not your savior. An outward attitude that led him to find his authentic self and a sense of intrinsic confidence. Also, another triumph for him was the ability to heal the generational curses leading to healthier, healed relationships with his fiancée and his children. Now his unresolved traumas will not inflict his children and continue to perpetuate their lives. On the final track, Mirror, Kendrick's uplift calls others to follow his example and purify themselves. Overall, Lamar's personal redemption is hope for others that face similar experiences in his life. Lamar truly sets forth as an example of freedom from past life mistakes, generational curses, societal stigmas, violence, divide, and oppression. So in my research, I faced two main limitations. First was the complexity of the album. There's so many different topics, and the length of it lends to opportunity to explore it in nuance, but this was restricted by the 5,000 word limit. Also, although he shares many of the same encounters and struggles as others, every single person's life experience is different. Therefore, his personal experiences can be generalized to his family, neighbors, and content in the broader African American community. However, it cannot definitively represent the African American experience as a whole. Nonetheless, his struggles and triumphs serve as hope for others. Lastly, in terms of future research, I would like to propose a few suggestions. First, there could be a direct comparative analysis between Mr. Morale and his next album to show the gap in the lived experiences, just like I did. Or you could replicate the same study by looking for specific themes of past studies, such as the themes that McLeod and Wirt derived. And lastly, you could perform a case study of hip-hop music and a specific demographic like Compton, but of multiple artists rather than just one to get a better view of the overall lived experiences of these individuals. Thank you.
Terrific. Thanks, Alec. I got 3 questions for you, and then we'll wrap this up. So for the first question, how did your review of the methods used by the scholars that you read early on, how did that impact on your choice of method?
Yeah, so while I was performing my literature review and looking at past research, I came upon a peer-reviewed journal by Kellen Northcutt that I talked about earlier in my presentation. He did a content analysis of Jay-Z's song "The Story of OJ" and used that to study race relations of African Americans despite their social standing. And I was able to use his method for content analysis and apply it to my own research. So I got the software that I used came from the same exact software that Kellen Northcutt used, and it helped the process that he followed help inform what I did in my own content analysis.
Okay, excellent. And then as a follow-up to that, how do your findings provide direction for future research? I know you talked about it a little bit in your final slide, but how does your conclusion directly lead to a future research study?
Yeah, so in my findings, it shows that there is a hope and that there is a path for even higher trajectory and growth in the African American lived experience. So in future research, this hope and this hope for change and uplift can be studied even further with either other music and other future albums that depict the African American lived experiences, or other sorts of media that can be analyzed to see if this gap is filled or not.
Okay, excellent. And then the final question, because I know you worked extensively with an outside advisor, how did your expert advisor facilitate for you a deeper understanding in your research process?
Yes, sir. So I worked with Ms. Sellers on campus. She was a great help for me throughout the whole research process. Specifically, at the beginning of the research, she directed me towards certain resources, outside resources that didn't necessarily pertain to Kendrick Lamar, to better understand the African American lived experience. So for instance, she guided me towards the documentary Made in America, The Story of OJ, because it talked about the race relations in California, specifically San Francisco, which is very similar to the same struggles that occurred in Compton, just like where Kendrick Lamar was raised. And then also, Ms. Sellers helped me throughout the whole content analysis process, giving me advice and feedback on first, like how to perform the content analysis with her prior research and her prior studies, and feedback on my findings and help me discover further implications.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you very much.